Alright, so let's go over cell membrane and the cellular processes. So here we have our plasma membrane, also called the cell membrane. We refer to it as the gateway to the cell. You're going to see lots of illustrations throughout this video about our phospholipid bilayer. We have our phosphate heads and our fatty acid lipid tails in the center. Functions of plasma membrane. They are a protective barrier, so that every cell, doesn't matter if it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic, will contain a cell membrane. It's going to regulate transports in and out of the cell, so it's selectively permeable. Certain things can cross that membrane while other things cannot. It's going to allow for cell recognition, kind of identifying what each cell does, and provides anchoring sites for filaments of cytoskeleton. It will also provide a binding site for enzymes. Interlocking surfaces bind cells together, so when a cell has to connect to another cell, they will interlock there. And then it also contains all the cytoplasm, so it holds all that cytoplasm within the cell. Again, here's another structure of our cell membrane, and you'll see on a lot of them you'll have carbohydrate chains, you'll have protein molecules. Sometimes we refer to this as to a fluid mosaic model, because it's studded with all kinds of different proteins and carbohydrates, cholesterols, as well as fluid, as it's constantly in motion. And you can see the two layers. You got a layer and a layer. So what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the balanced internal condition of a cell, also called equilibrium. So we want to keep that balance between the inside and the outside of the cell. It's maintained by the plasma membrane. It's controlling what enters and leaves the cell. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of a phospholipid. And truly, this is what we need to know. I don't need you to know any of this, but you've got the chemical makeup and the molecular. So here we have our phosphate head, which is polar. It is water-loving. And then we have our fatty acid lipid tails, which is your non-polar, and they're going to be water-fearing. Again, here's another diagram of our cell membrane. You can see the two layers, you got a layer and a layer, then you got a protein channel. Polar heads are hydrophilic, water-loving, so they're going to be on the outsides of the cell membrane. So here we have our phosphate heads, and here's the phosphate head as well. And then our non-polar tails are hydrophobic, so they're going to be pointing inward because they are water-fearing. And then it makes the membrane selective in what crosses. So when certain things can cross this membrane, while other things cannot. So the cell membrane is made up of two layers of a phospholipid called a lipid bilayer. So we have our polar head, hydrophilic, water-loving, and then we have our fatty acid tails, which are hydrophobic. And so here you can see the polar phosphate heads, and then our fatty acid tails. Hydrophobic molecules can pass easily through, while our hydrophilic molecules are not allowed to pass through, so they'll have to go through a channel. Solubility are materials that are soluble in lipids can pass through the cell membrane easily. So if it's soluble, meaning it's going to be dissolved, basically. Now we're going to look at carrier proteins, embedded proteins, or protein channels. So sometimes in the cell membrane you'll have these little proteins that are embedded in it, and they're kind of like a little doorway. They're special proteins embedded in the cell membrane that help move larger molecules like sugars and amino acids across that cell membrane. So they're going to help certain things come through, so there's little protein channels or carrier proteins. So different types of transport across the cell membrane. There are two main types of transport across that. We have passive, which requires absolutely no energy, and there are two main types. We've got diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is just diffusion with a little bit of help, and so no energy is required by the cell. And then we have active transport, which requires ATP to move particles across that cell membrane. Generally, you're going from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, and that requires no energy. If you're going the opposite direction from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration, then you're going to require that energy. Or if you have very large molecules, the cell will need to use energy to move those molecules across. So again, passive transport requires no energy in order to move particles across the cell membrane. It's kind of like going down the slide. And one type of passive transport is diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of a substance from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So here we can see our solute, our molecule is highly concentrated right here, and then it's going to move to the area of low concentration. It doesn't want to be next to each other. And way to kind of see that easily is if you take some food coloring and you drop it in a glass of water without even touching the water, you'll see it go highly concentrated and it's starting to spread out until it reaches equilibrium, it's balanced, it's evenly distributed. So again, diffusion is any molecule can go from an area of high concentration, highly concentrated, we're going to spread out into an area of low concentration. We want to reach equilibrium, and it's driven by random motion, so it's constantly bouncing off of each other, and it's going to reach equilibrium when it's evenly distributed. Okay, later on we will go through osmosis, so we are officially done with our basic notes.